So you have grains and now you're wanting to know how to store them to make sure that they're not going to go bad. This video is going to be an updated video about grain storage, and we're going to be talking about Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, and my own philosophy when it comes to storing grains. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grains and Grit, where we talk about all things real whole grains from a biblical perspective. I've already done a few videos about storing grains, and I still get more and more questions about storing grains. And so we have another updated video about grain storage, and I have tweaked some things myself as well. So in this video, we're going to be talking about what Mylar bags are and how they work, what oxygen absorbers are and how they work, when to use Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers when it comes to storing grains, how I personally store my own grains, and also my personal experience with storing grains for 11 years now. And then I'm going to share with you one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to storing grains and my philosophy as well. First off, let's talk about Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. Now, as you see here, I have the brand Wallaby Goods. This is not a sponsored video, but they did send me this pack and also this impulse sealer, so I could talk to you about how these items work and how I use them as well. If you've been around in the prepper or the homesteading type site for a while, you've probably heard of them because they are a very popular brand, because they're one of pretty much top of the line and definitely what I would recommend as far as Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers go. Because with Mylar bags especially, you do want to make sure that you have a good quality, that they're not super thin, otherwise they could puncture easily. They're not going to keep your food safe and protected for as long. Where Wallaby Goods definitely has, they have 5 milliliter thickness to their Mylar bags. So I highly recommend them, and I do have a coupon code for y'all in the description box below as well. So first of all, let's just talk about what Mylar bags are and what their purpose is. Now in this particular pack, I have 4x6s, 6x9s, and then 10x14s. They do go up all the way up to 5-gallon size, which is perfect if you're wanting to store grains that you've purchased in 25 and 50 pound bags. But I just have the smaller ones. So what Mylar bags are is, especially with Wallaby Goods, this is, they are made from several layers of food grade safe plastic and aluminum. Don't freak out about the aluminum because they do have a protective lining blocking your food from the aluminum. They are BPA free, so even though they're plastic, no BPAs. Wallaby Goods, not everyone has those, but they are resealable Mylar bags, which is awesome. So when you actually break the actual seal and you're using whatever in here, you can seal it back up and not have like an open bag like potato chips. What works is you put your food in here, and because they are protecting your food from UV lights, they are thicker material, so they're not going to tear. You also put oxygen absorbers when using Mylar bags as well. And this protects your food for longer term, and you do seal it. So this is their impulse sealer. So if I was to store, say, wheat berries, I pour my wheat berries in, I place my oxygen absorber in the top, I close it up like a Ziploc bag, but then you seal it up at the top, and their impulse sealers are great. Now this one's big. This is their 16-inch one, so it accommodates the 5-gallon size, but obviously you can use the smaller size as well, and they seal it. And what this does is it'll just protect your food for longer. And Wallaby Goods has on their website what foods to store in here. They have excellent articles on their website telling you the shelf life of it in these Mylar bags, what to use, what not to use, things like that. Now, what oxygen absorbers do is, well, they absorb oxygen. And what that does is, especially when it comes to grains, and this is the biggest issue people have with grains, is bugs. Of having those little weevils hatch, although you may not have them when you have the grains. This is kind of, I would say, one of the biggest issues that you potentially can have when it comes to grains. And so the great thing about oxygen absorbers is when you store them in your buckets, your Mylar bags, wherever it is absorbing all the oxygen from your container, and no oxygen, no bugs, because they have to have oxygen to live. And so it will help keep bugs away. These do eventually stop working. So how you know when your oxygen absorber is no longer working, and this is actually on the back of this pack, is they state that if an oxygen absorber is soft and easily bendable, then it's still working. If it's hard and crunchy, throw it out. It's no longer doing its job. Another thing about oxygen absorbers is you do need to make sure that you get them the size of your container. And usually they tell you when purchasing oxygen absorbers what size it is for what container. Now the big question, do you need Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers when it comes to storing grains? And this is where a lot of confusion comes about with grains. I've always stated that grains are super easy to store, and they are. So much so that they should be the base of your prepper pantry if that is what you're going for. Believe in it so much that I actually have a course, How to Master Prepping with Grains. I will link that below if you're wanting a course that I go into all the details with actually prepping with grains, why it should be the base of your prepper pantry. Because ultimately they are easy, and I think a lot of people overthink them. Bottom line, you do not need Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers when it comes to grains, especially your wheat berries. Pretty much all that you need is you need a good container with a good lid to keep moisture and any pest out. Now, corn, rice, oats. These are grains that are more starchy. They may have the oil on the outside of the grain kernel, as opposed to with wheat berries, they have the oil inside the wheat berry. But grains like brown rice, oats, groats, they have the oil on the outside of their grain. And so with that, Wallaby Goods actually, first of all, suggest that you do not store oily grains like that in Mylar bags. So if you are wanting long-term storage for grains like your rice and your oat groats, they do not recommend putting those type of grains in Mylar bags because the oil is going to make them go bad quicker. Now, in the past, I have suggested that what I've done with corn, rice, corn and rice especially, because those are the only grains that I've ever had issues with, you know, those bugs popping out over long term, is I usually freeze my grains and then store it in buckets. And usually I have not had a problem doing that. However, not everyone has the ability to freeze it, especially if you bought a 50-pound bag of corn or rice. And so the beauty that you can do, and what I'm going to start doing now as well, is I'm actually not going to be freezing the corn and the rice anymore. I'm going to be using oxygen absorbers. So when I'm just going to dump them in my bucket, have a really good lid, throw in some oxygen absorbers, bada bing, bada boom. Super easy still, you know, and I'll get into why when I use Mylar bags, things like that later. But that's what I recommend for corn and rice, is just dumping in a bucket and using an oxygen absorber, and that is going to help kill any bugs, and it's way easier than freezing. But those are the only two grains that I personally have had some issues with the weevils popping over time. Now, as far as your rice goes, I get this question a lot about which to store for long-term, brown rice or white rice. Brown rice is a more oily rice. If you are looking to store for very long term, I would say over a year, you need to store white rice, and that can be go into Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, or you can put them in buckets with the oxygen absorbers, up to you. But as far as long-term storage with rice, probably for over a year, you know, you're going to want white rice. If it's under a year, brown rice is perfectly fine. Also, a thing about oats, and you may have seen this in my Pleasant Hill grain haul video I mentioned, oat groats is what I like to store, that I like to keep on hand so I can roll my own and things like that. And oat groats is also a more oily grain, so you don't want to put it in Mylar bags, except you may have seen with Pleasant Hill grain, when I buy the oats from Pleasant Hill grain, They actually come, they have been slightly toasted to make it more stable. It's more stabilized up in oats to help kind of stabilize the oil on the outside of the oat groats. So those would be fine going into into Mylar bags. They also will store longer as well. So oat groats are a little tricky. That's something you need to look for, whether they've been toasted or not, to stabilize the oil on the outside of that grain. Otherwise, if you just are buying rolled oats or quick oats, those I would certainly stick in a Mylar bag with oxygen absorbers for long-term storage. Now, when to use Mylar bags for wheat berries is, I would say, if you're wanting to store it over a year, and by storing I mean you want to put it away and not look at it, think about it, touch it for over a year, then I would recommend storing them in Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, just, to be on the safe side, predominantly for bugs, especially if you have not purchased it from a reputable company that is known for always having super clean grains. So now how I store my grains and my personal experience with this. When it comes to wheat berries, I have never once had a problem with my wheat berries having any bugs in them. And usually I get them, I dump them in a bucket if I purchase them coming in a bag, and I put a good lid on it and I leave it alone. That's it with my wheat berries. The only ones I've had issues with weevils popping out is my corn and my rice. And like I said, I usually have frozen those grains and then just simply dump them in a good bucket with a good lid. Now I'm going to be bypassing that. Even if I choose to freeze, I'm still just going to be adding oxygen absorbers into the buckets just to be on the safe side. My dried beans, I just throw in a bucket and that's it. For me, I do not look at grain storage as, a 5-10 year type process. And so how I store and keep track of all my grains is I have a set amount that I want to keep on hand, and I rotate through those grains. So for me, I'm never going extremely long, over a year. Some things I have that I've had for more than a year or two. I did a little short where I had a bag of rye wheat, or a bucket of rye wheat that I literally had not opened in over a year. I'd already had it in 2 years and there were no bugs or anything like that. I'm in Florida where we have very high humidity. I store my grains mainly out in buckets in my uninsulated shed where it can get very hot, very, very humid. And I've never had a problems, especially with my wheat berries, for bypassing the Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. If I was to decide that, hey, I would like to keep grains on hand for 5 years down the road and I don't touch them, then I would use Mylar bags with the oxygen absorbers to be on the safe side. If you're wanting to know how much grains you would like on hand for X amount of time for your family, I do have a free grain calculator for you guys that helps you determine how much you would like to keep on stock. That is in the link below in the description box as well. Now, my biggest pet peeve when it comes to storing grains, I actually have two. And one of them is how people make it more complicated than what it needs to be. Again, as far as wheat berries goes, super simple, easy. You don't need Mylar bags or oxygen absorbers. By all means, if you feel safer using them, then use them. It's not going to hurt your grains. Again, the corn, the rice, the oily type grains, you do need a little extra finesse for. My biggest second pet peeve is you should be using your grains. If you want to have enough stock where you want to bury them in the woods for 5-10 years from now, great. But you should be using grains now. You should be using freshly milled wheat, baking bread, consuming those items now. And if you're doing that, then you can have a good stockpile that you're just always rotating through. So if things do go bad, you're going to catch it at some point, not 30 years down the road when you're seriously relying on these grains. And that's what this channel is all about, is teaching you how to use real whole grains in your daily life. Hopefully this video was helpful for y'all, that it answered some questions, kind of cleared things up. I will link my other videos that I've done about grain storage in the description box as well. Be sure to check out Wallaby Goods for all your oxygen absorbers and Mylar bag needs. And again, they have these awesome impulse sealers as well to help you seal up your Mylar bags. And again, coupon code for you, all in the description box below. As always, I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.